Hi, Gereon Ingedaay is joining me from south of Cologne in Germany, where he works in the area of transformational coaching and connecting to purpose. He uses logosynthesis for his own personal development and professional self-care and healing. Gereon is pursuing the certification as a practitioner in logosynthesis and uses the model in his work with clients. So thank you for joining me, Gereon.
Thank you for having me, Cathy.
So to start, I am always curious how people were introduced to logosynthesis and what results you noticed so that it made it curious for you to pursue further.
Yes, the first time I was introduced into logosynthesis was by a book by Laurie Weiss, Letting It Go. It was given to me by a friend of mine 4 years ago. And it was after my study in psychology and doing several coaching educations, and I'm a curious mind. I read a lot, and I read a lot about traumatology, and then I found logosynthesis and read Letting It Go, and I was quite outraged because she wrote about a very deep issue she could solve with a client in one session. And it was like, no, I have 1 meter in my bookshelf. It's like, they are all wrong, are they? You tell me. Yes, and a couple of months later, a issue surfaced in myself and was horrible. And I thought back to this book and thought like, okay, if they can solve it in one session, this would be great. I booked a session. I needed 2 for this issue, not 1, but it was so impressive. Since then, I started my practitioner and read everything I could and did many sessions and learned everything I can. And a year later, I implemented in my work. I started to implement it in my work.
Wow. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the issues feel so deep, and a lot of times we know the whole story behind it. So we know there's a lot that has gone into that story. So obviously it can't be solved in 1 or 2 sessions. And yet somehow things shift and the issues can fall away. Now, that's not to negate that some things are very complex and do take a lot more, and it is issue by issue that we work.
It was issue. This issue could solve 2 sessions. And of course, the journey continues for years and years to come.
I can relate. And I didn't even have issues. So, and I'm still working on my issues. So your work supports people in transforming their lives, and you've studied a lot of different models. So the human design systems, the gene keys, enneagrams, and a lot more, right? And so logosynthesis has been developed on, a very deep understanding of psychotherapeutic models, coaching models, spirituality, teachings. And so there's a lot of common elements. When people come to it, they say, oh, this sounds familiar. This sounds familiar. And yet, there's something unique about logosynthesis. So can you tell us about your perspective on what's unique?
The uniqueness is, for me, the simplicity. It's very elegant. There is a saying by Einstein, everything should be as easy as possible, but not easier. And it is complex and a work of a genius to bring it down very simple. Like E equals mc squared. It's very simple. This is one equation that is so simple, but it's not easy to understand. Same as logosynthesis. It's very simple. It's not easy at all. You need practice and work and supervision to apply it and apply it. But everything is reduced to the very basics. We have matrix, we have the self, we have essence. That's it. So we have a basic procedure that you need in about 98% of all cases. And the basic procedure is in the core are 3 sentences, and it's overwhelmingly easy. Sorry, simple, not easy.
I was going to say, sometimes it can feel pretty intense, but yes.
Yes, it is intense, and it does remarkable shifts. But William Lammers, and this is why I say I think it's a part of it as a genius, and I compare it with the EM equals MC square. So it is a work of a genius to boil it down to this basic sentence, and we have 4 basic sayings. What is this called?
Yeah.
Thesis.
The 4 principles.
The 4 principles. Yes. So it's boiled down to the thing we really, really need. And this goes a long way. Yes. And it's reduced of everything else.
Yeah. And so a lot of people, when they come to it, they have come from a lot of different models, a lot of scientific papers that they've reviewed. They've got all the data, they've got all the stats. And so sometimes it's a matter of unlearning things as well in order to accept that simplicity, I think, isn't it?
Yes, it teaches humbleness. Because to understand psychology, you need to study a lot and you need to be professional. But to accompany people, you need to be dumb and slow and the third one is
slow, lazy, and stupid, right?
Yes, slow, lazy, and stupid. And this teaches humbleness, because I can study a lot about developmental psychology, and it's important to evaluate some kind of issue. And it doesn't matter at all in a company of people, just be there and be present would be enough.
Yeah, because when I get into trouble using logosynthesis guiding someone, it's normally when I want to take them somewhere.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
Where they
and all the complex
when
models.
I am slow. Yeah. When I'm slow and I let them lead it, then they know exactly where they're going, and they have the power to use those sentences to shift what bothers them, shift how they suffer. Yeah.
And this is the training in humbleness, because we need professional training to understand what is happening. Without understanding of a landscape, we cannot interpret the land. We need to study landscapes. And then after that, we need to study humbleness to not, the landscape shouldn't be in between. Like, it can be behind me, and I watch and follow you and your energy and ask. And this is the training. People just study the landscape and say, no, I can guide you. No, you can't, because you cannot see the person, you just see the landscape.
Yeah, and it's important, because when you say that, what is going through my mind is, because a lot of times when we've studied the landscape and we know the landscape so well, we come in with our beliefs about what the landscape are. And so we have the diagnosis, we have the labels, we have the, we have the evidence of how they're going to respond, because it's always been that way. And sometimes when we bring all that into it, it doesn't help them in their process, does it, when we're accompanying a person?
Yes. Then we should try to fit the person into the landscape, and not using the landscape as a compass. Like, is it like this?
Mm-hmm.
Like this with you.
Yeah.
And this is like slow, lazy, and stupid.
Dumb.
Stupid is an important word here. I believe I'm more stupid than if you say it's like this, I threw away the landscape. If the landscape say it can't be like this, and you tell me it's like this, I threw away the landscape. Otherwise, I have to throw away you. And I cannot accompany you. So, yes.
Interesting.
So this is really unique in logosynthesis.
Yeah. So logosynthesis is still relatively unknown, especially in the area of, our medical systems, our healthcare systems, because it's not yet evidence-based. For many people, the idea of saying 3 sentences and anything that bothers you can be relieved, any issue can be resolved, just sounds very strange. And, here in Canada, we might say it's woo-woo, right? Like, it's a little out there as far as what's possible. And so a lot of times, I know when I'm speaking with people, it's the first impression, the first reaction, which is normal, is to dismiss it, because how can that possibly be. So I'm curious how you introduce logosynthesis to people, and are there barriers to incorporating this in your work?
I usually don't introduce it. I just do it. And they see it works. The proof of the pudding is the eating. Like, I'm the profession. I studied over 12 years in this field. I tried a lot, and I have a huge history of healing. I know what works. This is what works. If you don't trust me, go somewhere else. So I'm not offended by it. I know this works. I present it, and I don't have to. I don't want them always to understand it, because it doesn't need it. If it works, fine. We don't need to understand why it works. It works.
Yes.
That's it. If they really want to understand it, I can feel it. Is it just cynicism? Oh, it's just woo-woo. Really, this works? Show me. No. No. And oh, how could that work? Please tell me. Of course, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
But it works.
So in logosynthesis, we often start with the question, how do you suffer? I think of it in terms, what bothers you? What's the stressors in your life? What are those thoughts and emotions and physical sensations? And, sometimes also, because we work with meaning and purpose, we also start from the perspective of what are you here for? What's your purpose in life, and what gets in the way? So, Willem always said, if you're not suffering, if you're not struggling, then there's no work to do, right? But I haven't really met anyone yet that isn't struggling in some area of their life, and sometimes we kind of block it out. We don't always acknowledge that we're struggling because we're strong, but there's a wide variety of issues that people can come with, I guess, is my thought. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit of some of the issues. I know you work a lot with young adults, and I'm curious maybe if you could talk to that as far as what type of issues young adults come forward with and how logosynthesis supports their goals.
Yes, I used to work with young adults mostly. In the last years, it changes a little bit to more adults, but the questions are very similar. I work with young adults and mostly schools and also youth associations, and finding their direction of work and education that fits to their purpose, you might say, because this is a new question for our civilization. 200 years ago, it wasn't a question, what is your purpose? If your father was a peasant, you will become a peasant. Over. And it would be true for 99% of the population. It's like, this is it. So, and now they have about 10 or 12 subjects in school, and then they have about 500,000 options to choose from, which path they should want to go in their life. And of course, everybody knows their jobs probably will be taken by AI or robots in the very soon future. So I even work with people who made about 7 or 8 years education, and after they was finished, their job just didn't exist anymore.
Wow.
So and that's difficult for people to cope with. Like, no, I can be a flight attendant or flight manager in this or this direction, but they don't need it. They just have computers now. The job doesn't exist, and if it exists somewhere in the world, just 5 years. So, but then, so this is the most thing people come to me because I've also made the most experience with it, and the basic struggle they all have is we have lost a language of expressing human potential without economic utilization. So when I ask them about values and strength and interests, they mostly talk in economic terms. But this is not the way how you explore yourself. Because in my experience, a self, an essence, will not show itself when you look in it from the perspective of how can you utilize it. No, I am here. I am here for my own mission and purpose, and I just want to be here first. Like, but I've got a feeling that we've lost the language of it. Yes. When I ask them, what are your values? What are your strengths? They nearly have no words. We first need to talk about it. What are values? What are strengths? And then pool it. Okay, how much strength you can have, like 20, 30, 40, give me as much as possible and I help you. And we take the group and help you. Let's see, I believe you can do this. So, and pool as much as possible and then learn to prioritize it. Which are the important ones? So, and this is the main thing I do, to teach them and to explore with them the landscape of the human potential without using the words of economic utilization. In the beginning, of course, in the end, they want, like, how does it fit in this economic world? I want you to do something here, of course. But first, build it.
Yeah.
Because it will change in your 30, 40 years of living experience and working. It will change, definitely. But if you know why you're doing it, you can change it. It's not difficult to change it, to adjust it. Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, so much of our talk is about the economics, like why would you do something if there's not an economic reason for it? And yet that's one of the things with logosynthesis that I find is so beneficial, because it is essence, our who is our true self, and the matrix. And we're here to live our life in the matrix or in this world. So we're not just existing with no purpose, right? We do have a purpose and we have to live that out in our surroundings. And so quite often, I think when we can't make the connection between the two, then it gets very stressful. It gets, right, I want to quit. I don't want to be here. I don't see why I'm working so hard because there's no direction for me. There's a lot of things that come up. And, you know, I think back when I first started working, I studied as a dietitian. I decided I wanted to work in the food industry. And so as a dietitian in the food industry, often some of the more profitable foods were not necessarily the healthiest. And so, you know, throughout my career, I struggled a bit when what I was involved with wasn't necessarily aligned with a healthy lifestyle. And so you kind of go through and you're like, I don't see where this is leading, blah, blah, blah. And yet it's put me in a spot right now where healthy lifestyles is very much core and fundamental to the work I do. So yeah, every step is a lesson to be learned, I think, and every step teaches us something. And having that guidance is important. Yeah.
Here we have some misconceptions. I oftenly encounter, and I heard it through a learning of yours now in your description, that finding your mission is part of the mission. So it's not possible to live without mission, because also finding the mission is part of it. And to learn how things should not go is also important. So to accept this learning, and for me this also means to accept that our youth and childhood is much longer than in history before. Like childhood used to be over when they are 14. Now right. Work, develop your family. So, and I believe now we have about childhood until 30. So because it's very long time until you find your personality and build a profession and be able and stable enough to build a family and a profession in this world. It's very complex. So, and still they got stressed when they are 18. They feel like, oh, now I should know who I am and what is right for me. And like, if you don't make so much pressure and think like childhood goes to 28, explore, do what you like. It's like, it's not that much pressure. Second, Also finding out how it not work is important. And third is you need to learn what is your purpose, because life includes suffering. It definitely will. There will be parts that will make you suffer. There will be parts that will be overwhelmingly stressful. And you need a purpose, otherwise you cannot sustain it. You cannot confront suffering and complexity without meaning.
Yeah.
It will just crush you. Definitely it will. So, and
yeah, and that's the beauty of this work, is when something is overwhelming or something is crushing, we can work with that and resolve that so that we can move forward more connected to purpose. And I remember talking with Astrid Klein-Leinkhorst, and she does a lot of work with purpose, and she used the analogy of the clouds, right? So, you know, it's not like we've got this blue sky and see our purpose so clearly. It's resolving those blocks that get in the way of it, and every time a bit more clarity. And, you know, even for me, the beauty of it is that, you know, in hindsight, things become much more clear when you're in the thick of it with deadlines and workloads and priorities. Then, you know, sometimes that gets a little bit stressful, but when you look back on it and you say, oh, now that makes sense, right? But then I guess on the other hand, when I think of young adults, is they're starting their career and they say, oh, I have to do this job now for the next 40 years. That sounds overwhelming, and that is can be a stressor. Do you deal with that with young adults, as far as that kind of overarching pressure around careers and lifetimes? And
yes, this is the most common question probably, but it's, I believe, answerable if we go the way from who are you to what do you want to do in this life to what does it mean concretely. If we really go this way, they can re-answer it every time. I believe values will not change over life. The meaning of the value changes. But if freedom, for example, is important to you, freedom will always be important for you. It means different things in different stages of your life, but this value will stay. So then you have different kind of strengths. I believe strength can little bit variate themselves, but not that much. So if you're good at writing, of course, the subject of your writing will change, but your writing skill will be present like probably your whole life. Maybe it shifts from writing to speaking, but then it's maybe the quality of expression. Yeah, like strength changes a little bit, not that much. I believe values don't change. Values, strength, and values have pressure. If freedom is important, it will make the pressure to give freedom space in your life. Is integrity important? Is truth important? Is trust important? You have values that give pressure. And then you have strengths that are like streams of energy. If you like expressing, if you like talking, if you like writing, it's like a stream of energy and it's easy and it's flowing. Great. And then you have interests, which is some kind of a pulling force. It's in this world, in the matrix, there are some spots that have a pulling force to you. And if you can align pressure with flow of energy with a pulling force and align this, what does it mean concretely? Oh, this! It's very easy, but we need to have clarity about that. And this is the main focus of my work. If you have clarity of your pressures, of your streams of energy and the pulling of interest in the world, you can always realign yourself.
yeah. And it's interesting because even when you talk about freedom, like what came to mind for me a little bit around the freedom piece. And again, I worked 30 years in a corporate environment, right? So people were there because they needed a paycheck, right? Like they had responsibility for a family and they needed a roof over their head and they needed food on the table. So a lot of people that I worked with didn't have that, a sense of freedom, because they felt very tied down to their work. And I remember, and of course I did as well. I needed a job. I needed but I didn't have the same pressure around freedom. I always had the idea that if I didn't like my job, I could quit. So I didn't, and I felt that I could go and work somewhere else. I could do something else. I didn't have that same pressure. And I guess that's a little bit, I think, even where logosynthesis can support someone, because if you are in a job and you feel that pressure where you don't have freedom, that's a feeling, and that's an energetic structure, that's a block. And there is probably something in your past that may activate that so that you lose that sense of freedom, and to let that go. And again, I could I've got so many examples of situations, how people reacted in specific situations that I look back now and I say, oh, I wish I knew logosynthesis then, because it didn't have to be so difficult. We went through a lot of times where there were job layoffs and people lost their job, and the intensity that people felt, the stress that people felt around losing a job. And again, I had freedom. I could quit if I wanted, or if they fired me, so be it. But that was a different feeling. It was, and I go back to the way I was raised, that I had this belief that things would be okay, but not everybody has that. And so, yeah, I think there's an area.
You have to believe
there.
that it eventually it will be okay. And it also felt like you had this value of, it's called maybe self-esteem or self-empowering. You can be creative. You on your own can be somebody that is creative and can overcome difficulties. Like, this is also a trait of yours, it seems to me. Like, yes, also maybe there was the belief in a good outcome, but there was also the set of personality that has the self-esteem and the creative force to it to say, like, if I want, I can do this.
Right. And I can go back and, because a lot of times in logosynthesis, we talk about our family field. So I go back, and my parents were immigrants. So they said, if I want to go to Canada, I can do this. Right. So and it's how, whereas other people had different family experiences, and there's different energies in their family field. And, I think for me, the important point is we don't have to stay stuck or frozen in those energy fields and belief systems that we're in.
Yes. And this is the what I believe, we come with a set of values as this is the way as it meant to be for us. But it can be reorganized by our background, by conditioning. Like, for example, integrity and freedom is very high for me. I come from a background where security was very high and valued. So, and security isn't unvaluable for me. It's not the highest value. So, but I was raised as if it was the highest value. And I needed to, and really struggled with it. So, because no, it's not. It's not. I don't want to throw away security. Of course not. I'm a father. I have responsibilities, and I take them for serious. But they are not more important than my integrity and freedom. So, and this is a struggle. I also hear from your experience, like, okay, we come from with a set of values, I believe, but we need to free them. We need to unlearn other values we were taught, and with good reasons taught. So
yes, it's a survival instincts, right? Like a lot of times we've been raised in families, or we've had experiences that are necessary for survival, but it can get in the way of thriving and moving forward. And so,
yes, and therefore the blocks are. It's a great book. Peter Levine isn't he Canadian?
Yes,
He's
I'm trying to remember. Yes,
he's wrote a beautiful book, Trauma and Memory, and in the last chapter he wrote about transgenerational trauma and his experience he had, and also about studies that were made with mice and could show that trauma is very specifically would go through genetics, and it's amazing. And therefore one can understand why it's so difficult, because we don't need it from our personal biography. It's enough that our grandparents have experienced it very drastically and as a matter of life and death. And if this happens even 2 generations back, it will be activated in our lives if it hasn't been resolved earlier. So, for example, maybe can share an example of it.
Yes,
I had
yes.
many lumbagos from early years in my life, and I was dismissed from school sports for 12 years. Like, it was very bad, and they made scans of my back and spine and said like, oh, this guy can never do sports in his life. And lumbago in German is called Hexenschuss, which is something like the witch shot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and one therapist asked me in my 20s, like, which is shooting at you? And I said like, oh, come on, I like psychosomatic, but come on. which is shooting? I got lumbagos. God damn it, can you help me? So 3 years ago, when I did a logosynthesis session with Carsten on my lumbago, I asked my spine, what is happening here? And my spine was the first picture showed me was a soldier shooting somebody's neck. I could, after the session, it was clear to me, it was like 2 generations ago. My grandfather was forced into the Wehrmacht in Nazi Germany and had to shoot people, and he couldn't overcome this whole life. And this experience of him, where he was like stolen from the family. My family tried to fight against the Nazis, and they were broken, and they like robbed the children and forced them into war and forced them to shoot people, and they couldn't overcome it in their whole life. And 2 generations later, every X month, which shoot me and kicked me out, and for 12-15 years. And since the sessions 3 years ago, they disappeared. They didn't come back.
Wow.
So it's
wow.
like, and it was after that I felt sorry for the therapist who asked me years ago, like, which is shooting at you? And oh, that was the right question, but because I didn't have a personal story of it, I couldn't relate to it. So.
But the other thing is, and I guess that is where the simplicity of logosynthesis comes in, because not only does it help resolve the blocks, it helps to identify. Like, I talk a lot about mental imagery because we can relate to mental imagery in a traumatic situation. But again, what you just described is exactly the same process, right? It's being able to connect at an energetic level, not at a cognitive level, but at an energetic level, connect with the underlying trigger, which is mental imagery or sensory representation. So it's the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, gustatory, and olfactory, right? The 5 senses. And so when you are in a position where you trust whoever is guiding you, and you go along with the questions, and the mental imagery that arises is at an energetic level. It's not something that is going to arise if you're trying to think your way to it. And then once it does arise, again, the simplicity of logosynthesis is, I have 3 sentences for you. It resolves the mental imagery. And so that is so powerful for me from all the other models is, can people actually identify the triggering mental imagery? Not necessarily, because it is under our awareness. It's below our awareness or outside of our awareness. And the other piece is, even if we do identify that witch that is getting you, it's what do you do with it? What do you do with it? And logosynthesis, you don't even have to sit and talk about it. You just hear some sentences on that mental image.
Yes. And afterwards, it's dissolved. The symptoms mostly disappear. And it's not even really necessary. If this mental image is real, I tried to figure out what happened 80 years ago to my grandfather. I wasn't able to find it out.
Right.
And whatever happened, I don't know. And there's no to it. It's just like this seems to happen. From my perspective, it looks like as if I treat it as if and it dissolves and it's fine and it's and I have the freedom to choose if this is a story I want to continue or if this just is a story that just can go and I can write my own.
Yes. And it's part of healing that generational past, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And I believe you always come to this point. If you do your personal homework, you always come to some kind of collective and field because we are connected to the collective through our family. Of course we are.
Yes.
So,
yes.
And
yeah, and a little for
we have
me.
to resolve them.
Yeah. And a little for me, what I notice is that a lot of times we're connecting to the generational trauma of the past, and where we still struggle is how do we release it? How do we heal it? How do we let it go? And here in Canada, you know, there's things like psychedelic drugs that people are using to deal with trauma. There's a lot of talk therapy. There's a lot of, kind of repetitive awareness. So there's a lot of different methods. But if we're just awakening it all and we're all feeling it without being able to release it, to me, that feels more painful. And for me, that may still be in the way of our purpose, you know, similar to what you said. If I can release it, then I can move forward with my purpose. And maybe part of my purpose is to help heal that past generational trauma. But there is an element of having a model, for me, to have a model that can help release it. Yeah.
Yes. I also can understand the models that are not very efficient, but because it was such a long way and journey to understand suffering and understand the process of healing, and the more I studied it, the more humbleness and gratefulness developed from like, oh boy, how courageous it is to deal with these severe problems without knowing anything and work with it 40 years to say like, okay, I couldn't solve it, but this is what I've learned. Like, give your best, next generation. And they did it for over 120 years until somebody like Lammers. And I'm sure he was frustrated in his career over and over. Like he tried and couldn't, and until somebody is saying like, I'm standing beside my shoes, and they go back to your shoes. And it was like this maybe transmission of wisdom that occurs in this moment, that was, and all the years of practice and studying was necessary for this transmission to happen in this moment, where Logosynthesis came to him in like 60, 70, 18 years ago. And yes, so I can understand why they stick to it, because I learned it so long and they tried it so hard.
Yeah. And the other beautiful thing with logosynthesis is that it brings in that spirituality or that faith and that power of the word, right? And so, you know, if I think of my parents growing up in the Netherlands during the war, there was a very strong faith, and then they came to Canada and their faith was so strong. But that's all they had was the power of prayer and the power of the word. They didn't have someone saying, you know, let's come and sit and talk about your struggles. They had their faith. And I think what Willem has done beautifully is bring the psychotherapeutic and that all that work that's been done in the trauma field, which is so important. and married it with that spirituality and the power of the word, and created something quite unique.
Yes. Yes, this is also like maybe one of the most important part of it, like the connection to a transcendence. I believe this is one of the main sicknesses of our time. Ken Wilber described it brilliantly as German. It's Flachland. It's the flat Earth. You know, like we've lost the depth. So everything is just on the surface. And if my senses cannot touch it, it's not real. And we've lost the feeling of why isn't it? Is this matter real? I don't believe it. I believe really real is what matters and not the matter. So, you know?
Yes, I'm reading the book, The Matter with Things. Yeah.
Sorry?
I'm reading the book, The Matter with Things by Ian McGilchrist, and there's elements of that there as well.
Yes, and I believe it's also shown already. We know that we don't perceive a door, we perceive a hole in a wall where we can go through. We perceive the meaning of it, and from the meaning we extract the object. So it's not that we have the object and we get out the meaning. We have the meaning and perceive the object. So it's even rooted in our biology that we are meaningful creatures. So, and we are built to praise something. We are made to do it. So, and if you not put yourself into awareness and bring into awareness what is most meaningful to you, someone else will direct it, or simply the body will direct it. Like okay, much joy and much food and much sex as you possibly can. This is meaning. So, and no, it's so sad to just take the first steps of consciousness and leave it as the whole. So, and to connect depth, connect transcendence, and transpersonal meaning. Wow, this is what we need in this time. Otherwise, probably ego will kill us all, or a disconnected mind says like, oh, we just need an AI future. And so for me, these are both horrible scenarios. Like a disconnected mind from the body. It's like, who in a civilization that is disconnected from nature, this is the mind disconnected from body. Oh, that's not healthy in my eyes. So, and just
well, and you gave a beautiful example of how it's not, you know, how the body will end up reminding us, right? The body will end up reminding us because it has that awareness.
Yes, and I believe the body is the manifestation of our purpose. The purpose is already manifested fully in the body. This is why the body makes decisions and not the mind. The mind tries to make decisions, but it will not. The body will make decisions, and the body will make oneself sick if you try to live your life from the mind. The body will say no.
Or we could say essence makes it and controls the body and the mind. But yeah.
Yes, but the body has the man and the possibility to find wholeness.
Yeah.
Yes. You, for example, seems to me as a woman that should follow some kind of gut feelings and emotions. So most people have a gut feeling, and a gut feeling is good or not good.
Mm-hmm.
And this is so straightforward. It's much more intelligent for decision making than the mind. I really do believe it. If the belly's, the gut feeling says and you still do it, what should happen? So nothing that will make fun.
Well, and again, that is what we work with, right? When we get those feelings and we recognize that there's some information there, and we can resolve it so that we can move forward. And So I understand you're almost you're moving along with your practitioner curriculum and to become a practitioner in logosynthesis, and there is a significant amount of work in that process. I know some people might do it over a couple of years. Some people stretch it out longer because a huge component of it is the personal development work. It's actually You know, a lot of times we say, oh, we want the piece of paper. And I know when people get into the practitioner curriculum, it's such a journey of self-discovery that, you know, sometimes it takes a while to go through it. And that, can you give us a sense of your journey with the curriculum?
Yes, I started, as I told, with with a very big issue, and very quickly came to lumbago, and then I started to not only read the books, but to start a practitioner now, as the basic seminars and self-practice seminar, and moved on with the path of courage to resolve trauma. So there are special protocols for different issues in logosynthesis. And I discovered so much dissociation that it was very clear for me that I needed years to put myself together. I know it from before. There's a reason why I studied psychology and did several courses in healing and development before, because I needed it, but I couldn't find a method to dissolve it. I just could find more and more tools to get along with it. Or to get along with it is not the same as solving it. And starting solving it, I recognize, oh boy, I really have some homework to do. And then Corona came, and I started traveling with my family. And this is why I stopped my work with young adults in schools, because most of the schools were closed. And I started to work online and went with my family for 2.5 years on the Canarian Islands. And I was very thankful for Lamas writing so much books in this time, and
Yes.
operate so much courses online that I could attain them and continue my work. And yes, for 1 year I was accompanied, and I still be accompanied by Carsten. He's still helping me implementing logosynthesis into my work and accompanying with my own process. Yeah, and it felt like I have to clear my personal biography, then my family history, which was a lot. And then I discovered that if there is not so much like burning places inside of you, you recognize that even though it's not burning anymore, it's not necessarily growing there. You have to take care, because it shouldn't be burning, it should be growing something.
Interesting. Yes.
And when you say like, no, it's not burning, but why it's not growing? Because you need to take care of it. You need to practice it. Okay, how does loving, be loved, and be present, and being a father, how does it work? So for me, it was this journey of exploring all this and becoming, for example, the first present loving father in a long history of my family and many generations of abandonment and neglect. So
yeah, and it's what I love about it in that whole process is you are who you are in the moment, and that's enough. And then you recognize where you can move forward and what you can do to move forward, and your past doesn't have to dictate your future. It doesn't all have to be solved all at once. There's so many elements that it is so I find it so gracious to acknowledge that what we experienced in the past doesn't have to dictate the future, and we can move forward at our pace. And the other beautiful thing I love about the practitioner curriculum is the community, because it is such a I don't know, there's just something about the community that kind of feels like family, right? That it's supportive and interested in your growth and your potential.
yes.
And
yeah, this is why I mentioned Carsten so many times, because he's from this course, and he's part of LIA, and he will build the Logosynthesis Institute in Cologne, and Lammers 2 weeks ago, they met Lammers and Carsten and started this institute, and he really accompanied me and took part of my development, and he was really interested, and it wasn't self-serving. I felt it. Yes, I paid him for the sessions and I paid the seminar, of course, but it's not about that. It was really interested in me and my development, and he never gave me answers. When I came to him, I said, I have this issue. He asked me questions. And it's funny because sometimes I sit there and thank you for the first semester question. I always ask everybody, but good question.
It's different when you have to do it yourself, isn't it?
Yes. So it's really important to have somebody to accompany you.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. So is there a key message that you would like to leave as we wrap up?
Okay, so 3 key messages is words have power, so be impeccable with your words. Second, I believe our job is working more on ourselves than we on our jobs. So pick them very carefully. And third, I believe it's better to work more on yourself than on your job.
Very good. Very good. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. We could go on and on, I can tell, but I appreciate everything you offered. Thank you.
Thank you for your line of questioning and the opportunity for me to speak and your interests.